Hi there, this is Luciano Quintana and I will be your lettering teacher for this tutorial. In this video we are going to develop a design like this, a nice and stylish lettering with a 3D or perspective effect applied to it. So, let's begin. Here, as you can see, I am working with Adobe Photoshop CC. This is the latest one, but any version that you have will be just fine for this tutorial. So, let's create a new file. Something with 2000 by 2000 pixels would be just fine, and let's name it as tutorial because we are that creative, and let's create. First we need to create a new layer, and let's name it as grid, and let's talk about that. Here, as you can see, we have so many different ways to achieve the first layout for our design, but for today we'll be using just two of them. For this exercise we'll be using just two words, so I will select my brush tool and I will start drawing the basic guidelines to work on later. The first one, as you might notice, is a little bit simple, is kinda boring actually, but the second one will have a slightly curved base and uppercase lines. At this point it's important to try to remember that we don't need to get actually good looking strokes. The quality of our lines is not important right now. This will be just a reference for work on later. And here, as you can see, the inclination guides of the two different words are also different. The first one has 90 degrees lines and the second one has 60 or 55 degrees lines that will help us to draw our calligraphy or script lettering. After we finish drawing these lines, if we need to correct something or move something around, we can use our lasso tool in the tool panel and just select the grid and move it away, or we can size it up or shrink it down. Now, for the second step of this tutorial, we will need to use a sans serif and a script alphabet references to work on. You can use this that we provide to you. You can download these files to use as a reference, or you can use any font that you have already on your computer that you feel comfortable with. Now, back in Photoshop, I will create a new layer and I will name it as a sketch. I will also drag the opacity down of my grid layer to work comfortable, and I will select my brush tool and start sketching. In this step it's not important to try to get perfect lines or very good strokes. We are using this just as a reference to work on later, so again try to don't get very picky with this. It needs to be intuitive, it needs to be fast, and it needs to feel like you are sketching on paper actually. So try to have fun with this step, and if you mess something up you can correct it later. And also understanding that this is just a sketch step for this tutorial, we are going to delete this layer after actually. So what kind of brush are you using or which color did you prefer is not important. But this spacing that you see between the letters is known as tracking. When we design, we need to try to keep consistency in the tracking that we apply to the same word. With that in mind, we can move forward to the next step of this tutorial, the cleanup process. For this step, I will select a color for my background and I will just paint it. And I will also create a new layer on top and I will call it as outline or final sketch, as you wish. Let's zoom in a little bit in our design. And here you can actually use any brush that you like. I will still using this kind of pencil or graphite looking brush because I really like the texture that it gives, but this is really up to you. You can use any brush that you feel comfortable with. So I will select my sketch layer, I will drag the opacity down to work comfortable again, and I will just delete the grid layer. Now back on my first layer, with my brush tool selected, I will start drawing the outline of my first word. I will apply some weight here. The strokes needs to be a little bit thick. I will try to do the lines the best that I can, but it's not really important to try to get perfect lines. If you need some help while you're doing the vertical and the horizontal strokes, you can use the shift button on your keyboard while you're using the brush tool, and you will get 90 or 0 degrees perfect lines. In this step, the really important part is to try to keep consistency in the weight of all the outline of these letters. Now, in the second word, the script one, we will use the first sketch reference as a reference only if we need to rearrange something, if we want to draw or flourish bigger or smaller than we did before. We can totally do it. We will also use the same weight in all of the letter forms. We won't have a thin and a thick stroke. We need to try to keep constant these kind of lines. You can also seize this step as an opportunity to erase some ornament if you feel like you won't need it after, or add some new flourishes if you feel creative. This is the moment to do it. And after we finish drawing these lines, we will select our sketch layer and delete it because we won't need it any longer. And as we did before in the grid part of the tutorial, we can use our lasso tool and select one of the letters or one entire word and move it around, size it up, shrink it down, or correct the actual layout of our design if we need to. Now here comes the fun part, the drop shadow and the 3D effect. Back in Photoshop, we will select our outline layer, we will right click on it and duplicate it as a copy. We can also use the copy and paste shortcuts with our keyboards. Let's name it as drop shadow, that's right. Select the layer and drag it a little bit down and right, maybe around there, that's right. We will put our layer in the back and use a blend mode as difference or exclusion and drag the opacity down to work comfortable again. Now let's create a new layer in the middle and let's name it as 3D or something like that. I will zoom in my first word and start connecting the points. Here I am choosing a light red color, but it doesn't matter, we can change it later. And as you may notice, I am connecting my first layer with my drop shadow effect. I will use this light red to the right side of all my letters, and then I will pick a darker color for the bottom side of it. So let's quickly connect these two layers with all these lines. This is a very simple step actually. And then we can start painting the side of the letter. I am using the same brush that I used before because I really like the texture that it gives, but this is really up to you. You can use any brush that you feel comfortable with. In this step, it's important to try to remember that the only 3D effect that we need to apply is in the outside part of our letters. Try to don't apply it to the inside of it. And then we will go again to our color selector and pick a darker one for the bottom side of it. Here the technique that I will use is the same that I used before, is the same kind of process, but I am doing it in the same layer that I did before. If you want to control everything that is happening on your design, and if you want to try to don't mess anything up, you can do this shadow effect on a new layer, as long as you rename it as shadows of the fair words or something like that to keep working properly. Now here, every time that we find a corner, we can apply the shadow effect and it will be easy. But when we have some curve and when we have so rounded edges, it will be a little bit more tricky. Here in my letter U, I am applying some extra lines between the dark and the light places to try to achieve this kind of gradient effect. After we finish doing this, we will apply the same kind of process, the same lighting logic to the second world. Let's create a new layer, of course, and let's name it something as Path 3D, and zoom in, select a new color for this, and let's start connecting the points. It's the same process. We will also use a light color for the right side of the letters and a darker one for the bottom side of it. Here in the script lettering we almost don't have any straight line or edges to apply an easy 3D effect. It's almost everything rounded, so we need to use the technique that we saw before in the first word, that kind of gradient shading effect with the lines, and that will be the key to achieve the 3D effect on this part of the project. Now, after we did this, I will select my drop shadow layer and I will drag it back right about there maybe to try to achieve this kind of inner shadow effect of my fair world. Then I will create a new layer and let's name it as tooth fill or inside as you like, and with a new color selected I will just paint the inside of my first world. If you are not feeling comfortable with this color, we will change it later, so don't worry. Okay, there we go. Now I will select my drop shadow layer and I will go to the blend modes and select subtract. If I find some lines of the shadow that I can actually see, I will select my erase tool and delete it, just to clean up the design. Now the final thing that I will do in this step will be create a new layer and let's name it as flourishes or ornaments, and I will draw this kind of lines in the inside part of my first word, just like a little detail. It's really easy to do, it's very simple, but it looks really nice. Remember that if you need some help doing a straight line with your brush, you can always use the shift button on your keyboard while you're using your brush. For the rounded lines you will need to have a little patience. Now for the final step of this tutorial, let's talk about the final touches. As I said before, one of them will be the color correction, so I will select my tooth fill layer and I will go to adjustment layers and select hue saturation. I will click also this button. This allows the effect to only apply the selected layer, and let's play around with the hue slider and the saturation and lightness one until I get comfortable with the result. So there we go. But if you notice, the design is still looking kind of empty, kind of flat. So I will create a new layer and I will name it as background pattern or second background, as you wish, it's the same. And I will select my brush tool again. I will pick a slightly darker color than the background and start drawing some shapes. In this step, try to really have fun with it. Remember that the main character of this artwork will be the lettering part, so the background just needs to go along with it. So we need to don't get very obsessive with this. Just drawing some circles and some stars will be just enough for this. And if we are not very comfortable with the color that we choose, we can always go to an adjustment layers and pick hue saturation and change it until we feel really comfortable with the final outcome. There we go, something like that. Now the final step would be to select all of our layers and move it to the center of the image if we need to rearrange something. Now let's combine all of our layers by right clicking in any one of them and select the option flatten image. Now let's go to the filter menu and select noise, add noise and let's try it like 5 or 6%. That will be it. So, we are done. I hope you find this tutorial very helpful. If you have any further questions or comments, you can ask in the comments below and I will be answer them. So, that will be all for today. Thank you very much for watching this video and I hope to see you soon in another quick tutorial. Cheers!